Hello Imogen, hello Josh. Granny's here again to tell you a story. I think this one might be for Imogen because I have chosen a longer one this time. But I will read another one later so that I can send that to Josh. So I have decided that Imogen would probably really like to hear the one about the princess. And this is my old book that I talked about. This is not the book I had when I was a little girl, but it's very, very similar. It's a very, very old book. But the story, which is what matters, is actually much nicer in this book because it is illustrated by one of the best illustrators around at the moment, called Lauren Child. And Lauren Child is the lady who draws Clarice Bean. And on another day, I might read you a Clarice Bean story. But for now, I know you love princesses, so I decided I would read this one today. Now, it is, as I said, quite a long story, so there might be a point where you say, actually, I need to go to the toilet or I need to have my tea. So you can pause it at any time. And if I get to a point in the story where I think it's a good place to stop, then I'll say so. But for now, let's begin. So here we are. Here is the front cover. The Princess and the Pea. Lauren Child is very clever because what she does, she makes collages. So she doesn't just draw things, she does cutting and sticking, just like you do. And she makes pictures with bits of old newspaper and bits of wallpaper and bits of sweet paper and anything she can find really. And she makes really good pictures. And then what the people who make the book do is they photograph it and they turn it into pages, and you'll see as I go along. Once upon a time, many moons ago, of course, there was a king and a queen who had a prince for a son. He was a nice boy and not unpleasant to look at. In fact, handsome. Not too handsome, just handsome enough. And there are the pictures of the king and the queen and the prince. One day, when the prince was old enough, his parents decided it was time for him to be married. You know what parents are like, and a prince's parents are no different. The prince didn't object to the idea, but he did make one condition. He wanted to marry for love. He was just that kind of romantic boy. He told his father and his mother, "I will gladly marry tomorrow, but whoever she is, she must be more mesmerising than the moon, and I must find her more fascinating than all the stars in the sky. And there must be a certain something about her." "What something?" asked the Queen. "Just something," said the Prince. "Yes," agreed the King, "that's all very lovely, but our condition is that she must be a princess of blue blood and equal in royalness to you." The Prince wasn't all that interested in these details, but he knew he wouldn't get any peace until he agreed. So he did. Now, you may think finding yourself a suitable princess would be easy to do if you are a handsome prince, but you would be wrong. Just how many mesmerising and fascinating princesses do you imagine there are out there? Well, the king and queen did all the traditional fairy tale things in order that their son might be bowled over by the right girl. There they are, the king and the queen. They threw a royal ball and invited all the single royal girls in the land. Everyone said yes, everyone danced, everyone had a good time, but none of them captured the prince's heart. And here are all these lovely girls. Can you see all the lovely princesses? The prince explained to the king and queen how simply none of them was mesmerising or fascinating, and none of them, not one of them, had a certain something about them. No, if he couldn't marry for love, then he would rather live alone for all eternity, gazing at all the stars in the night sky. Not only was he romantic, but he was also a little dramatic. The king and the queen said, "The thing is, our dear son, what you are really looking for is a real princess, and a real princess is a very rare thing indeed. They do not grow on trees," said the king. "No, no, they do not," said the queen. "You see," said the king, "a real princess is not only mesmerisingly beautiful and fascinatingly interesting, but most important of all, she has manners," said the queen. "No one should travel without them," said the king. "No, never, never, never go anywhere without your manners," agreed the queen, taking her elbows off the table. "The only problem with real princesses," said the king, "is that they are terribly hard to get hold of, and they almost never read their post." "No," said the queen, "real princesses are very hard to come by. No one has ever found one by looking. You just have to wait for one to come to you." And here they are waiting. And you see, they're waiting under the tree. But the prince, who rarely listened to his mother's advice, did the traditional fairy tale find yourself a bride thing of riding far and wide, looking throughout the kingdom for a real princess. He even rode far and wide to other people's kingdoms. But in far land, all the girls he met were fascinatingly beautiful, but horribly vain. There's a very vain princess looking at herself in the mirror. And in the kingdom of Shonen, they were all mesmerisingly clever, but exceedingly dull. This is a dull princess. And in Harvonia, there was a certain silliness about them. I mean, you can see his problem, can't you? Bit silly. The prince came back very downcast. He refused to eat anything for supper, not even the delicious rook pie that the royal cook had prepared as a welcome home. He lit a candle in his window and he just stood and gazed into the night sky. And there he is, gazing into the night sky. Not so far away, in a treetop house just over the mountain, there was a girl with the most beautiful black hair you have ever seen, or possibly never seen. She woke up that night to see the moon dancing on her ceiling, and she popped on her favourite pea-green dress and glided down the stairs into the garden. Here she is waking up in her bed. The moonlight shone in such a magical way that she wondered to herself if it could possibly look as beautiful on the other side of the garden wall. So she tripped down the garden path, stepped over a pile of unopened letters and slipped through the gate, where she saw the moon perched on top of the mountain. "I wonder if the moon would be as beautiful up there," she thought out loud. And here's the most beautiful picture of her going out through her garden. Can you see? Absolutely beautiful in the night time with the moon shining. And it was. So she continued walking right down the other side of the mountain until she came to the wild woods. Would it be so beautiful in the woods? Thought the girl. And it was. It really was. But just as she came out of the woods, a dark cloud moved across the moon, and suddenly it wasn't. There she is in the woods. Bother, thought the girl. She could feel a heavy storm brewing. She would never make it back to her own little treehouse in time. There was nothing for it but to walk on. So on she walked. She had not gone more than 7 steps when she felt the first heavy raindrop fall on her cheek. Bother, thought the girl. Within 3 minutes she was already soaked to the skin and her 2 shoes were filling with water. The wind was howling, the trees were creaking and cracking as if they might part company with their roots, and the rain pounded down and the lightning flashed its forked tongue in the blackened sky. And the girl began to tire. It was not an umbrella weather. No, an umbrella would have done you no good at all. I think I might just catch a terrible cold unless I have the very good fortune to spot a light in a window. But what is the likelihood of that on this wild, wild night in the middle of nowhere?" said the girl out loud. However, as she made her way round the next corner, that's exactly what she saw. Using her very last drop of energy, she climbed the steep, steep steps up to the huge front door. And here she is. She can see the lighted window ahead of her. You see. The Queen was woken all of a sudden by a very, very loud knock at the palace door. Being a queen, she sensibly woke her husband, an unusually heavy sleeper, and asked him to go and see who in all the kingdom might be banging on the door at this time of night, for goodness sake. When the king opened the door, what he saw was a dripping wet girl, standing, without even a coat, on his doorstep. She had long raven black hair and skin as pale as ivory and lips as red as rose petals. You know how it is with these fairy tale types. She was, despite the effects of the weather, a real beauty. But she was also shivering cold and looked as if she might collapse at any moment. Here she is at the door. There we are. Now, of course, you want to know what's happening next, and I am going to carry on the video and tell you. But if you wanted to stop and pause, this might be a good time. And I will continue. Of course, the king was very polite. He had manners. That's the thing about real kings. Their manners are impeccable. He didn't even mention the large puddle that was forming on his very expensive royal floor. Instead, he told the girl to warm herself by the fire while he called for his wife, who didn't particularly want to get up on such an unreasonable night, but being a real queen, never ever forgot to be hospitable to strangers. And here they are. Look, she's in front of the fire. And I think she's very pleased to be invited to sit by the fire. The Queen thought that this girl looked special. There was something mesmerising, something fascinating, something the Queen couldn't quite put her finger on. Unlike her husband, she came straight to the point. "So, my dear, who are you on such a wild and unruly night?" "Oh, I am a princess, and I live in a tree house on the other side of the mountain." "A tree house?" pondered the king. "A princess?" inquired the Queen. "What kind of princess?" "Oh," replied the girl, "I am a real princess. I was outside admiring the moon when it started to rain, and then, what with the thunder and lightning, well, I lost my way, and then I saw a light in your window. I do hope you can forgive my waking you at such an hour." The Queen thought, well, she sounds like a real princess. She looks like a real princess, but we'll see. So after the girl had finished her elderflower cordial, the Queen ordered a steaming hot bath and supplied her with the softest towels and an exquisite nightgown. "Oh, this is far too good for me," said the girl, which of course is exactly the sort of thing a real princess would say. While the girl was taking her bath, the Queen had the servants make up the bed in a most unusual fashion. She chose the most fabulous bedchamber with the most beautiful four-poster bed, and then right in the middle of the bed she placed a tiny, tiny pea-green pea from the royal garden. And then on top of the pea she piled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 feather mattresses. And on top of the 12 mattresses, she placed the finest linen sheets and the plumpest Siberian goose down pillows. What a bed! Look at that! And you see, it's massive. What "What a beautiful bed," gasped the girl. "Oh, I'm sure I will sleep like a real princess in this bed." And up the ladder she climbed. "We'll see," thought the Queen. There she is, climbing up the ladder into bed. But that night the poor girl hardly slept a wink. She was tossing and turning all night. Despite her exhaustion, she could not make herself comfortable. And worse still, the next morning she found she was black and blue and rather achy. At daybreak, the Queen knocked on the door with a cup of tea. "How did you sleep, my dear? I trust comfortably." Not wanting to be rude, the girl replied, "Oh, very well, yes, perfectly. Thank you so much for asking." "Aha," thought the Queen. "I knew she couldn't be a real princess." But what the Queen was forgetting was that any real princess has such impeccable manners that it would be impossible for her to tell her host, who had gone to all the effort of making her a bed stacked with 12 feather mattresses, that in fact it was the most uncomfortable night that she had ever had in all her life. The Queen, though most disappointed, invited her young guest to have breakfast down in the royal dining room. Here's the dining room, there we are. And there they all there, just about to have some breakfast. When the prince saw the girl, his eyes lit up. He thought she was more mesmerising than the moon, and when she spoke he found her more fascinating than the stars, and there was a certain something about her that caused him to let go of his teacup, which clattered to the floor. The princess couldn't help thinking there was something romantic, something dramatic, something strangely charming about his clumsiness, and she bent down to pick up the cup. A real princess will always pick up your cup if you drop it. Kindness is practically their middle name. But this was not the only reason she did so. There was a light in the prince's dark eyes which reminded her of all the stars in the night sky. It did not escape the Queen's notice that as the girl bent down she let out a cry, something a bit like "ouch." "Whatever is the matter, my dear?" said the King. "Oh dear, I'm all aches and pains today, and I just don't know why, and I feel so awful when you went to so much effort, and how ungrateful I must seem, and I hope you will forgive me." But there was nothing to forgive, because, as anyone knows, a girl who can turn black and blue when a tiny, tiny pea-green garden pea is placed under 12 feather mattresses must surely be a real princess. The prince, who was not very bothered about this detail, simply said, "There's a certain something about you." And the girl smiled and told him her name. There they are. I think they're going to fall in love. And after the moon had risen and set several more times, the prince asked the girl to marry him. That's the thing about real princes. They know all the right questions to ask. And she, being a bright girl, as all real princesses are, knew a real prince when she saw one. So she said yes. And they were married in a very real fashion, outside in a garden where the sky twinkled with stars and the moon shone down, and everyone had a splendid time. There is the wedding. Look at that, lovely, all the people having a wonderful time. Peas were not served at the banquet because, as everyone knows, real princesses are not especially fond of peas. And there we are. I hope you enjoyed it. It's one of Granny's favourite stories. Bye for now.